Modals of Might. Strength of advice in English modal verbs. Hello, dear learners. Today, we are going to explore a very intriguing part of the English language, modal verbs and how they express different levels of advice. Modal verbs are incredibly powerful in English, allowing us to express obligation, possibility, ability, and much more. Today, our focus will be on how they give advice. Modal verbs are special types of verbs that express modalities, such as ability, likelihood, necessity, and permission. Today we're interested in how they express advice. The modal verbs we typically use to give advice are should, ought to, had better, and must. Remember, modal verbs are followed by a base form verb, like you should eat healthier food. We must reconsider our plans. She ought to study for her exams. When it comes to advice, not all modal verbs are created equal. Let's compare how the strength of advice varies with different modal verbs. 1. Should and ought to are often used to give advice or make recommendations and express a moderate level of urgency or importance. For example, you should try to sleep early tonight. Or, you ought to start exercising. 2. Had better is used to give advice with a stronger recommendation than should or ought to. It often implies negative consequences if not followed. For example, you had better finish your homework before playing games. 3. Must is used to give very strong advice, almost like an order. For example, you must see a doctor immediately. Similarities. All these modal verbs are used to give advice or suggestions. They are all followed by a base form verb. Differences. They differ in the strength of advice they convey. Had better and must imply more urgency or importance than should or ought to. Had better often suggests negative consequences if the advice is not followed. Well done, learners! You've now expanded your understanding of English modal verbs and how to use them to give advice with varying levels of strength. Remember, it's all about the context and the urgency of your advice that determines whether you use should, ought to, had better, or must. As always, practice makes perfect. Try using these in your everyday conversations to get the hang of it. Stay tuned for more interesting lessons on English grammar. Until then, happy learning!